I'm a virgin, and you need a wife. That's what the desperate schoolteacher declared to the lonely mountain man. She climbed that treacherous mountain path, thinking she was trading her virtue for survival. He thought he was gaining a housekeeper for his 3 orphaned charges. Neither knew they were walking into a fight that would shake the entire territory. Because sometimes the most desperate proposals hide the most dangerous secrets. And when powerful men discover what's buried beneath that mountain cabin, a marriage of convenience becomes a battle for everything they hold dear. In a land where silver speaks louder than love and justice comes from the barrel of a gun, can 2 broken hearts protect what matters most when the whole world wants them destroyed? Your comments remind me that we're not alone in feeling deeply. If loyalty, second chances, and human dignity mean something to you, then you're right where you belong. Clara Whitmore's hands trembled as she folded her last teaching shawl, the soft wool still carrying the faint scent of chalk dust and pine wood smoke. The empty schoolhouse creaked around her in the cold October morning, its familiar sounds now holding a hollow echo that matched the ache in her heart. Through the frost-edged windows, the Colorado mountains loomed dark against the pale sky, their peaks already dusted with early snow. She placed the shawl in her carpet bag alongside her Bible, a handful of pencil stubs, and the dog-eared copy of Little Women she'd read to her students every Friday afternoon. The meager collection of belongings seemed a poor reflection of her 15 years of teaching. 15 years of shaping young minds, wiped away by a single letter from the school board. The words still burned in her memory. Replacing you with Mrs. Patterson, whose married status better reflects the values we wish to instill in our students. Clara's throat tightened. At 35 years old, she'd heard the whispers growing louder each year, spinster, too educated, intimidating to suitors. Now those whispers had finally cost her everything. The floorboards protested beneath her feet as she made one final circuit of the classroom. Her fingers traced the smooth wood of each desk, remembering the children who had sat there just days ago. Little Sarah Cooper with her gap-toothed smile, Tommy Jenkins, who'd finally mastered his multiplication tables last week. They would all belong to Mrs. Patterson now. Clara pulled her worn coat tight and lifted her carpet bag. The brass key felt heavy in her hand as she locked the schoolhouse door for the last time. The crisp morning air carried voices from nearby, 2 ranchers leading their horses to water. "Heard old Jacob Brennan's looking for help up on Pine Ridge," one said, his voice gruff with the morning chill. "Since Anna passed, he ain't been the same. Fine carpenter, though. Finest in 3 counties. 5 years alone's a long time," the other replied. "Man needs a woman's touch in his home, especially with winter coming on." Clara's heart quickened at their words. Jacob Brennan, she'd heard the name before, whispered with sympathy in church. The German widower who'd lost his wife Anna in childbirth, who lived alone in his mountain cabin crafting furniture that sometimes made its way to town. The walk back to Murphy's general store seemed longer than usual, each step heavy with the weight of her uncertain future. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the dusty street as Clara climbed the narrow stairs to her rented room. The familiar scent of coffee and leather from the store below drifted up through the floorboards. In the fading light, Clara emptied her purse onto the small table by her bed. $12 in coins clinked softly against the wood, her entire savings after paying this month's rent. It wouldn't see her through to Christmas, let alone the harsh Colorado winter ahead. She sat at the table, pulled out a sheet of paper, and began writing with shaking fingers. "Mr. Murphy, I thank you for your kindness these past years. Circumstances require me to leave town. Please keep this month's rent for any inconvenience." The words blurred as tears threatened, but Clara blinked them back. Self-pity wouldn't feed her or keep her warm. Instead, she found herself thinking of Jacob Brennan, a widower alone on his mountain, a man who might need a wife as desperately as she needed a home. The very thought of proposing marriage to a stranger made her cheeks burn with shame. But what choice did she have? Clara changed into her nightgown and knelt beside her narrow bed, clasping her hands tight. "Lord," she whispered, "give me strength for what I must do tomorrow. Give me courage to climb that mountain and face whatever awaits me there." The autumn wind rattled her window, making the glass pane shiver in its frame. Tomorrow she would gather her belongings and her remaining dignity and make the long climb up Pine Ridge Mountain. Tomorrow she would knock on a stranger's door and ask to be his wife. As she lay in bed, Clara could hear the distant howl of a coyote echoing off the mountainside. She pulled her thin blanket tighter, trying to quiet the voice in her head that kept whispering how far she'd fallen, from respected teacher to desperate woman, ready to offer herself to a man she'd never met. Sleep was slow in coming that night, but Clara's dreams were filled with mountain paths and the image of a lonely cabin silhouetted against the sky, while the wind continued its restless dance around the eaves of Murphy's General Store. The eastern sky barely showed a hint of gray when Clara slipped out of Murphy's General Store. Her breath formed small clouds in the frigid October air as she adjusted the carpet bag in one hand and the small basket of day-old bread in the other. The town lay silent around her, only a lone rooster's crow breaking the dawn stillness. Clara paused at the base of Pine Ridge Mountain, its looming shape dark against the lightening sky. The path ahead wound like a ribbon through the pines, disappearing into morning mist. From here, it looked deceptively gentle. She knew better. The climb to Jacob Brennan's homestead was 3 miles of steep terrain. "One foot in front of the other," she whispered to herself, squaring her shoulders. Her sensible town shoes, worn smooth at the heels from years of schoolroom pacing, slipped on the first stretch of gravel. Clara caught herself against a pine trunk, the rough bark biting into her palm. The rising sun brought little warmth as she picked her way upward. Loose rocks skittered beneath her feet, and more than once she had to catch herself on tree branches to keep from falling. The carpet bag grew heavier with each step, its handle leaving red marks across her fingers. After an hour of climbing, Clara's calves burned with the effort. She found a fallen log beside the path and sank down, placing her basket and bag carefully beside her. The town below had disappeared into the morning haze, while above her, the path still stretched endlessly upward. "What am I doing?" she murmured, massaging her aching feet through the thin leather of her shoes. The very idea seemed madness in the clear morning light. Climbing a mountain to propose marriage to a stranger. But the alternative stretched before her just as clearly. Winter coming on, no job, no family, and $12 to her name. Clara allowed herself 5 minutes of rest before standing, her knees protesting the movement. She retrieved her belongings and continued upward, focusing on each step rather than the distance ahead. The second hour of climbing proved even more challenging than the first. The path grew steeper, forcing Clara to stop every few minutes to catch her breath. Her shoes, never meant for such terrain, offered no protection against the sharp rocks and twisted tree roots that seemed determined to trip her. She paused again, leaning against a pine tree. Its sticky sap caught at her sleeve, but Clara hardly noticed. Doubt crept in with her exhaustion. What sort of welcome could she expect? What kind of man lived alone on a mountain for 5 years? The stories she'd heard in town painted Jacob Brennan as everything from a gentle craftsman to a grief-maddened hermit. A crow's harsh call startled her from her thoughts. Clara looked up and caught her breath. Through a break in the trees, she spotted a thin curl of smoke rising against the morning sky. Her heart began to pound harder than it had during the entire climb. 20 more minutes of careful stepping brought her to the edge of a small clearing. Clara stopped, taking in every detail of Jacob Brennan's homestead. The log cabin stood solid and well-maintained, its stone chimney sending that telling thread of smoke into the air. To one side, a workshop shed sat surrounded by neat stacks of cut lumber. A small garden plot, now frostbitten and brown, spoke of summer vegetables carefully tended. Everything about the place suggested care and order. No broken tools left to rust, no fallen branches cluttering the yard. Even the wood piles were stacked with precision, covered against snow with carefully pitched bark sheets. Clara made her way to the cabin's front door, her legs trembling now from more than just exhaustion. She smoothed her wind-tangled hair with shaking fingers, wishing she had a mirror to check her appearance. Her face felt chapped from the cold mountain air, and she knew her dress must show signs of the difficult climb. The sound of hammering drifted from the workshop, steady, rhythmic blows that spoke of skill and purpose. Clara took 3 deep breaths, trying to still her racing heart. The cool mountain air filled her lungs, carrying the scent of pine sap and wood shavings. With every ounce of courage she possessed, Clara walked to the workshop door. The hammering continued, unaware of her presence. She raised her hand and knocked, the sound seeming impossibly loud in the mountain quiet. The hammering stopped abruptly. Heavy footsteps approached from inside, unhurried but purposeful. Clara's heart thundered in her ears as the latch lifted. The door swung open, revealing a tall man with broad shoulders and a neatly trimmed brown beard threaded with gray. His blue eyes, clear as mountain streams, widened in surprise as they met hers. Despite his size, there was nothing threatening in his presence, only genuine astonishment at finding a woman at his workshop door. The mountain air seemed to pause with Clara as she faced the tall man in the doorway. Jacob Brennan stood before her, a half-finished chair rung held loosely in his calloused hands. Sawdust dusted his sandy hair and broad shoulders, catching the morning light like tiny stars. His blue eyes moved quickly from Clara's face to the treacherous path behind her, concern creasing his weathered features. "Fräulein, you shouldn't be up here alone," he said, his German accent softening the words. "The path is dangerous, especially in town shoes." Clara's carefully rehearsed speech suddenly felt foolish in her mouth, but desperation drove her forward. She straightened her spine, lifting her chin to meet his worried gaze. "Mr. Brennan, I am Clara Whitmore, the schoolteacher from Cedar Falls," she began, her voice steadier than she felt. "I'm a virgin, and you need a wife. I propose we enter into a marriage of practical convenience." The chair rung slipped from Jakob's fingers, clattering against the workshop doorframe. His eyes widened, and a deep flush crept up from his beard to his hairline. For a long moment, only the wind in the pines broke the silence between them. "Please, come inside," he finally managed, stepping back from the doorway. "You must be frozen through." The workshop's warmth wrapped around Clara like a blanket as she stepped inside. The scent of fresh-cut pine and wood shavings filled the air, and morning light streamed through high windows, illuminating dancing dust motes. Tools hung in neat rows on the walls, and a half-finished rocking chair sat on the workbench. Jakob quickly cleared wood shavings from the room's only chair, a sturdy piece with intricate carved details along its back. "Sit, please," he said, gesturing to it. "You've had a long climb." Clara sank gratefully onto the chair, setting her carpet bag and basket beside her. Jacob remained standing, his tall frame seeming to fill the small workshop as he waited for her to continue. "I know this is unconventional," Clara said, forcing herself to maintain eye contact. "But I've lost my teaching position. The school board wants a married woman for the role. I have $12 to my name and winter's coming." She spread her hands in her lap, grateful they weren't trembling. "I'm 35 years old, Mr. Brennan. I can cook, keep house, and help with your accounts. I'm educated and hard-working. I would make a good wife." Jacob's expression softened as she spoke, compassion replacing shock in his clear blue eyes. He leaned against his workbench, sawdust falling from his sleeve. "Fräulein Whitmore," he began gently, "I am honored by your proposal, but I must—" A sudden burst of high-pitched German shouting cut through the workshop walls, coming from the direction of the main cabin. The voices rose in volume, followed by the sharp crash of breaking crockery. Jakob's face fell, his shoulders sagging beneath his rough wool shirt. "Ah, that would be Heinrich's children," he said heavily, already moving toward the workshop door. Clara rose to follow him, her curiosity overwhelming her embarrassment. "Heinrich?" she asked, hurrying to keep up with his long strides as they crossed the yard to the cabin. "My brother," Jakob explained, his voice thick with emotion. "2 months ago, there was an accident at the silver mine. Heinrich and 3 others." He trailed off, shaking his head. "The children came to live with me. There was no one else." Another crash echoed from inside the cabin, followed by the sound of a child crying. The voice was high and frightened, speaking rapidly in German between sobs. "That's Maria," Jakob said as they reached the cabin door. "She's only 5 years old. The youngest." His hand rested on the door latch, but he paused, turning back to Clara. His eyes held a mixture of apology and barely hidden desperation. "I should have mentioned them right away. 3 children, Carl is 10, Luisa 8, and little Maria. They've lost so much, and I—" He gestured helplessly at the door, behind which Maria's crying continued unabated. Clara stood beside him on the cabin's small porch, her heart beating quickly for reasons that had nothing to do with her earlier climb. Through the rough-hewn door, she could hear the chaos of children in distress. Maria's tears, the shuffle of feet, more rapid German she couldn't quite understand. Jakob's hand tightened on the door latch as Maria's cries grew louder, her small voice calling out something that made him close his eyes briefly in pain. Jakob pushed open the cabin door, and chaos erupted before them. 8-year-old Thomas stood atop the kitchen table, his boots muddying the wooden surface as he waved a wooden spoon like a sword. 12-year-old Emma, her dark braids swinging, scolded him in rapid German while attempting to sweep broken pottery from the floor. In the corner, 5-year-old Maria huddled, her small shoulders shaking with sobs as her blonde braids came undone. The cabin itself told a story of masculine struggle. Though the log walls stood solid and the roof was sound, dishes crowded the wash basin, clothes lay scattered across chairs, and the stone fireplace held nothing but cold, gray ashes. The air carried a chill that spoke of too many meals eaten cold and too few moments of proper care. Without hesitation, Clara moved to Maria's corner, kneeling beside the crying child. "Kleine Mädchen," she whispered, remembering her grandmother's gentle words. "Süße Kind." The German endearments might have been imperfect, but Maria's sobs began to quiet at the sound of the familiar language. Thomas's defiant stance wavered as he noticed the stranger in their midst. He climbed down from the table, cheeks reddening as his boots hit the floor. Emma stood frozen, broom in hand, her dark eyes wide as she studied Clara with a mixture of suspicion and desperate hope. "Herr Brennan," Clara said, turning to Jakob, "might I have a wash basin and towel?" Her voice carried quiet authority, and Jakob moved quickly to fetch the items, grateful for someone else taking charge. Clara dipped the clean towel in fresh water and began to gently wash Maria's tear-stained face. "Wie heißt du?" she asked, using one of the few German phrases she knew with certainty. Though her accent was American, the attempt at their language drew shy smiles from all 3 children. "Ich bin Maria," the little one whispered, hiccuping slightly. "Das ist Emma und Thomas." She pointed to her siblings, who had drawn closer, drawn by Clara's gentle presence. Clara nodded, smiling warmly at each child in turn. She rose smoothly, keeping one hand on Maria's shoulder, and surveyed the cold fireplace. "Emma, would you help me with the fire? Thomas, perhaps you could gather those clothes while I see what we can make for lunch?" The children responded to her calm direction as parched earth responds to rain. Emma hurried to help with the kindling, while Thomas gathered scattered clothing without protest. Jakob stood in the doorway, watching in amazement as his brother's children, who had been wild with grief for 2 months, fell naturally into order under Clara's quiet guidance. Within an hour, the fire crackled warmly, clothes were sorted for washing, and Clara had assessed the meager contents of Jakob's kitchen stores. She found enough to make a simple but filling meal of beans, cornbread, and the last of the summer's preserved apples. The scent of warm food drew the children to the table, now cleaned of Thomas's boot prints. As they ate, Clara encouraged them to talk, nodding at their mixed German and English responses. Emma's natural intelligence shone through as she helped translate for her siblings, while Thomas's defensive posture gradually relaxed. Maria remained close to Clara's side, occasionally touching her skirt as if to ensure she was still there. The afternoon passed in a steady rhythm of small tasks. Clara showed Emma how to properly sweep the corners, taught Thomas the correct way to stack firewood by the hearth, and let Maria help arrange clean dishes on the shelves. Jakob moved between his workshop and the cabin, bringing in more firewood and watching the transformation of his home with quiet wonder. As evening shadows lengthened across the cabin floor, Jakob cleared his throat. "Fräulein Whitmore," he said softly, "it's too late for you to return to town safely. Would you consider staying the night? Emma has a small room she could share with Maria." Clara looked at the children's faces, seeing hope warring with fear of disappointment. She nodded, and Maria's small hand slipped into hers. When darkness fell, Clara moved through the evening routine as if she'd done it 100 times before. She helped Emma and Maria change into their night dresses, gently unbraiding and brushing their hair. Thomas allowed her to check that he'd washed his face properly, ducking his head to hide his pleased smile when she praised his thoroughness. For the first time since their father's death, all 3 children were tucked properly into bed. Clara smoothed Maria's blanket, straightened Emma's pillow, and made sure Thomas had fresh water by his bedside. As she moved from room to room, Jakob followed quietly, watching as she gave each child something they desperately missed, a mother's gentle touch at day's end. The floorboards creaked softly under Clara's feet as she made her way to the cabin's main room before dawn. Jakob already knelt by the stone fireplace, carefully building up the flames from overnight embers. Morning chill hung in the air, and Clara pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "Good morning," she said quietly, mindful of the sleeping children. Jakob looked up, his blue eyes reflecting the growing firelight. "Guten Morgen," he replied, adding another piece of split pine to the flames. "Coffee?" Clara nodded gratefully, watching as he moved to the wood stove with practiced motions. Soon, the rich aroma of coffee filled the cabin, chasing away the last wisps of sleep. They sat at the kitchen table, steam rising from 2 tin cups between them. "The children," Jakob began, his accent thickening with emotion. "They responded well to you yesterday." "They're good children," Clara said. "They're hurting, but good-hearted." Jacob's large hands wrapped around his coffee cup. "I came to America with Heinrich in 1878. We were young, full of dreams about the American West." A sad smile crossed his face. "2 years later, I married Anna Mueller. She was..." He paused, searching for words. "She was sunshine. Always smiling, always kind." Clara waited patiently as Jakob gathered himself. The fire popped and crackled in the silence. "In 1882, Anna and our son died in childbirth." His voice grew rough. "After that, I threw myself into my work. Carpentry became everything. Heinrich worried about me, but he had his own dreams. He was always the adventurous one, always chasing silver claims while I stayed with my wood and tools." Morning light began seeping through the cabin's windows as Jakob continued. 2 months ago, Heinrich's mine shaft collapsed. By the time we reached him..." He shook his head. "The children came to me. I am their only family now, but He gestured helplessly at the cabin's disorder. "I am failing them." "You're not failing them," Clara said firmly. "You're doing your best in an impossible situation." It was Clara's turn to share. She wrapped her fingers around her cooling coffee cup. My parents died of influenza when I was small. My grandmother raised me. She was from Bavaria, actually. That's where I learned what little German I know. Jakob nodded encouragingly. I became a teacher at 19, Clara continued. It was everything to me. The children, the books, watching young minds grow. But men in town... She smiled wryly. They didn't want a wife who could quote Shakespeare or teach algebra. Now I'm 35, dismissed from my position, and winter's coming with barely $12 to my name. The cabin grew brighter as they talked, morning sun streaming through the windows. In the children's rooms, they could hear the first stirrings of wakefulness. Jakob set his empty cup down carefully. I have a proposal, he said. Stay through winter. The children need teaching, the house needs managing, and I need help. We can see if... He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. If a marriage of convenience might work between us. Clara felt hope flutter in her chest. A trial arrangement. Yeah, Jakob nodded. You will have food, shelter, and safety. The children will have proper care and education, and we will have time to know if we could build a life together. I accept, Clara said simply. After breakfast, Jacob showed Clara around the property. The workshop stood solid and well-maintained, filled with the tools of his trade and the sweet scent of fresh-cut wood. A vegetable garden, now frostbitten and brown, stretched behind the cabin. The chicken coop needed repairs, but half a dozen hens still scratched in the yard. They walked to the edge of the clearing, where Jakob pointed to a distant hillside. A rough-cut path led up to a dark opening, now covered with wooden planks. Heinrich's mine, Jakob said quietly. He was certain he would find silver. Instead, ... He didn't finish the sentence. Clara studied the boarded-up mine shaft, understanding better now the shadow that lay over this mountain home. But as they turned back toward the cabin, she saw Emma helping Maria button her dress, while Thomas carried in fresh firewood. Perhaps, she thought, there was room here for both healing and hope. Jacob caught her watching the children. They need you, he said softly. Perhaps I do too. The morning sun warmed the clearing as they walked back to begin their first full day together, 4 broken hearts learning to beat in time with one another. The autumn days settled into a gentle rhythm at the mountain cabin. 2 weeks passed like water flowing in a clear stream, each day bringing small improvements that transformed the once chaotic household into a proper home. Clara's touch showed everywhere. Faded cotton sheets became cheerful curtains that danced in the window breeze. The floors, scrubbed clean each morning, gleamed in the sunlight. Beds were made, clothes mended, and meals appeared on the table with clockwork regularity. The children thrived under this new order, their grief slowly softening in the warmth of Clara's care. Every morning after breakfast, Clara transformed one corner of the main room into a schoolhouse. Emma, Thomas, and Maria sat at the sturdy table while she taught them reading, writing, and arithmetic. Emma proved to be a quick study, her 12-year-old mind eagerly absorbing English words and helping translate for her younger siblings. Her blue eyes, so like her uncle's, sparkled with pride when Clara praised her progress. Thomas, at 8 years old, showed less interest in books, but came alive during practical lessons. When Clara incorporated measurements and angles into his studies, using Jacob's carpentry tools as examples, the boy's face lit up with understanding. She often caught Jacob watching from his workshop doorway, a proud smile beneath his beard, as Thomas explained mathematical concepts using wood scraps and sawdust. 5-year-old Maria blossomed like a flower turning toward the sun. The little girl shadowed Clara throughout the day, helping with simple chores and soaking up the maternal attention she desperately craved. Her German-English mix of words grew more confident, and her laughter rang through the cabin more frequently. The evenings became precious times of family togetherness. After supper, while Jacob worked on small carpentry projects by the fire, Clara would read aloud from one of the few books she'd brought in her carpet bag. Her clear voice brought stories to life, while Maria curled in her lap, and the older children sat close by, entranced by tales of far-off places and noble deeds. Jakob found himself looking forward to these quiet evenings more than he cared to admit. His hands stayed busy with woodworking, but his attention often drifted to Clara. The way she changed her voice for different characters, how she paused to explain difficult words, the gentle way she stroked Maria's hair. In stolen glances, he noticed things about her he hadn't seen before. The grace of her movements, the intelligence in her brown eyes, the strength hidden beneath her gentle manner. During the day, Jakob worked steadily on a secret project. In odd moments between furniture commissions, his skilled hands shaped pieces of smooth pine into teaching supplies. Alphabet blocks emerged from his chisel, each letter carved with careful precision. Counting sticks lined up in neat rows, and a small blackboard took shape from seasoned wood, its surface sanded silk smooth. Clara noticed Jakob too, though she tried to keep her thoughts proper and practical. She couldn't help admiring his patient strength as he taught Thomas basic woodworking skills, or the tenderness in his large hands when he lifted Maria onto his shoulders. Sometimes their eyes would meet across the room, and something warm and unexpected would pass between them before they both looked away. One evening, as Clara tucked the children into bed, Maria caught her hand with small fingers. "Fräulein Clara," she asked in her sweet mix of languages, "will you be our mama?" The innocent question pierced Clara's heart like a bittersweet arrow. She looked down at the child's hopeful face, so trusting and open, and felt the full weight of longing in her own soul. For a family, for belonging, for love beyond mere convenience. "We'll see, little one," she managed to say, her voice soft as she smoothed Maria's blanket. "We'll see." She kissed the girl's forehead and quietly left the room, her emotions too raw to trust herself with more words. In the main room, Jakob sat in his usual place by the fire, working on a delicate piece of carving. Clara took her chair opposite him, picking up her mending basket though her hands trembled slightly. The silence between them felt different tonight, comfortable yet charged with unspoken feelings. The fire crackled softly, casting warm light across their faces. Neither spoke, but in that quiet moment, both felt the subtle shift in their arrangement. What had begun as a practical solution to their separate problems was growing into something deeper, something that made their hearts beat faster, even as it filled them with peace. Jakob's chisel moved steadily over wood. Clara's needle dipped and rose through fabric. Outside, wind whispered through pine trees, and somewhere in the distance, a lone coyote called to the rising moon. Inside the cabin, two souls sat in companionable silence, each wondering if the other felt the same growing warmth in their heart. Frost painted delicate patterns on the cabin windows that November morning. Clara stood at the iron stove, stirring a pot of warming porridge while the children practiced their letters at the table. Jakob had just stepped outside to split more firewood when the sound of approaching hoofbeats broke the morning quiet. Through the window, Clara watched a sleek black horse emerge from the mist between the pines. Its rider sat straight-backed in an expensive eastern saddle, his dark coat and polished boots marking him as someone far removed from frontier life. He reined his horse to a precise stop in the yard, surveying the homestead with cold, assessing eyes. Jakob set down his axe and moved toward the stranger, his stance wary but polite. Clara recognized the protective shift of his broad shoulders as he positioned himself between the visitor and the cabin. "Good morning," the stranger called out, his voice carrying the smooth polish of city breeding. He dismounted with practiced grace, pulling off leather gloves to reveal manicured hands. "I'm looking for the heirs of Heinrich Brennan." Clara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. She gestured for the children to stay at the table, moving closer to the window to watch. I'm Jacob Brennan, Heinrich's brother, Jacob answered, making no move to shake the offered hand. And you are? Cyrus Blackwood, representing Consolidated Mining Enterprises. He reached into his satchel, producing a leather folder filled with official-looking papers. I've come with an opportunity that could benefit your family greatly. Clara noticed how Blackwood's smile never reached his calculating eyes. She pressed a reassuring hand to Emma's shoulder as the girl tried to peer around her at the stranger. Recent geological surveys have revealed something quite extraordinary about your brother's mining claim, Blackwood continued, laying out documents on a nearby stump. That modest shaft he was working? It seems to tap into the richest silver vein yet discovered in the territory. Jacob's expression remained carefully neutral, but Clara saw his hands tighten at his sides. Our company would like to help you realize the value of this asset, Blackwood said smoothly. We're prepared to offer $500 for the full rights to the claim, a very generous sum for an undeveloped prospect. Heinrich left the claim to his children, Jacob stated firmly. I'll need time to consider any offers on their behalf. Blackwood's pleasant manner shifted subtly, like shadow crossing the sun. Of course. Though I should mention that developing mines can be dangerous work, especially in such isolated locations. He gestured at the surrounding wilderness. Accidents tend to happen to properties that don't properly cooperate with progress. Tragic fires, cave-ins, sometimes entire families are affected. The threat hung in the cold air like smoke. Clara pulled Maria closer as the little girl whimpered, sensing the tension. I believe we're finished here, Jacob said, his voice low and steady. I'll have my answer when I'm ready to give it. Don't wait too long. Blackwood mounted his horse with fluid grace, but his eyes had turned hard as flint. Progress won't wait forever. Neither will we. He wheeled his horse around and rode away, leaving behind his documents and the heavy weight of his threats. Once the hoofbeats faded, Clara hurried outside. Jacob stood studying the papers Blackwood had left, his face troubled. These are legitimate surveys, he said as Clara reached his side. Heinrich's claim papers are all proper too. The children truly are heirs to what could be an enormous fortune. He looked up at the distant mountainside, where his brother's mine shaft lay hidden. No wonder Blackwood tried to grab it cheap. And now they're targets, Clara said softly, glancing back at the children watching anxiously through the window. $500 for a claim worth how much more? He'll be back, Jacob, and next time he won't be so polite. Jacob nodded grimly. We need legal help. Someone who knows mining law and can't be bought by Consolidated. He folded the papers carefully. I'll ride into town tomorrow. Talk to Judge Wilson. He's honest and he knew Heinrich. Clara wrapped her shawl tighter against the chill. The children shouldn't stay here alone while you're gone. Not after those threats. No, Jacob agreed. You'll all come with me. We'll make it a proper trip to town, stay at the hotel. Let them think we're just shopping for winter supplies. They turned back toward the cabin together, where 3 worried faces pressed against the window glass. Clara felt the weight of responsibility settle more heavily on her shoulders. These children needed protection now more than ever, not just from the bitter mountain winter, but from men whose greed made them far more dangerous than any natural threat. The early morning frost crunched under Jacob's boots as he hitched the horses to the wagon. His breath formed white clouds in the cold air while he checked each leather strap and buckle with careful attention. Clara watched from the cabin doorway, arms wrapped tight around herself, trying to quiet the worry gnawing at her heart. I should be back before sundown, Jacob said, adjusting the final harness. Keep the doors locked. The rifle's loaded beside my bed if you need it. Clara nodded, glancing back at the children setting up their lessons at the table. Be careful in town, Jacob. If Blackwood has friends there. I'll watch my back, he assured her, then climbed onto the wagon seat and clicked to the horses. Clara stood watching until the wagon disappeared down the mountain path. Inside, she tried to focus on teaching, but her eyes kept drifting to the window. Every rustle of wind through the pines made her start, imagining riders approaching through the trees. In Cedar Falls, Jacob tied his team outside the land office, a weathered building with cloudy windows. The floorboards creaked under his heavy steps as he approached the counter where elderly Mr. Guthrie sat hunched over his ledgers. "Might I see the recent claim transfers?" Jacob asked quietly. Guthrie peered at him over wire-rimmed spectacles, then carefully closed the office door before pulling out several leather-bound books. His gnarled fingers trembled slightly as he opened them. "Look here," he whispered, pointing to column after column of entries. 6 claims abandoned since August. 4 more sold to Consolidated Mining for a pittance. The Wilsons, the Reeves family, the Martinez brothers, all gone now. Jacob studied the pattern of transfers, his jaw tightening. Were they truly abandoned? Guthrie glanced nervously at the door. "Folks been having accidents, fires, cave-ins. Strange how their claims ended up with Consolidated right after." He leaned closer. "That Blackwood fellow, he visits families late at night, makes threats. Next thing you know, they're selling cheap or leaving town entirely." Troubled by this news, Jacob next visited St. Michael's Catholic Church, where Pastor O'Malley was sweeping the stone steps. The priest's weathered face brightened in recognition. "Ah, young Brennan. I was sorry to hear about Heinrich. He was a good man, always at Mass with those beautiful children." "Father, did Heinrich ever speak to you about his claim?" Jacob asked after they stepped inside the cool church. O'Malley nodded. "Indeed, he showed me the papers himself, filed them proper and legal. Said he wanted everything clear for the children's sake." The priest's expression grew serious. "But be careful, my son. Sheriff Kohler's been turning a blind eye to Consolidated's doings. Just last week, the Wilsons' barn burned down. Sheriff called it an accident, but everyone knows better." Back at the cabin, Clara kept the children focused on their lessons while watching the road. Emma practiced her English letters, Thomas worked sums on his slate, and little Maria colored pictures of animals. But Clara's nerves stayed taut as a bowstring until she finally heard wagon wheels approaching at dusk. Jacob's face was grim as he shared what he'd learned over their simple supper. After the children were tucked into bed, he and Clara sat at the kitchen table, speaking in low voices. "7 families driven out in 3 months, Clara whispered, horrified. "And the sheriff won't help?" "He's in Blackwood's pocket," Jacob confirmed. "We need Heinrich's original claim documents to prove our case, but I've searched everywhere since he died." Clara sat up straighter. "The children's Bible, the German one they read from each night. Heinrich used it for their bedtime prayers, didn't he?" Jacob's eyes widened. He hurried to the children's room and carefully lifted the worn leather Bible from beside Emma's bed. Opening it reverently, he found several folded papers tucked inside the cover, Heinrich's neat handwriting marking boundaries, dates, and official stamps clear as day. They spread the documents on the kitchen table, studying them by lamplight. The claim was ironclad, filed properly with witnesses' signatures, including Pastor O'Malley's. These papers could protect the children's inheritance, if they could keep them safe from Blackwood. "We're not just fighting for land now," Clara said softly, touching the edge of one precious document. "We're fighting for their future, everything Heinrich wanted for them." Jacob nodded, his face set with determination in the golden lamplight. "And we'll win, for Heinrich's children, for all the families Blackwood's hurt." He covered Clara's hand with his own, both of them drawing strength from the touch as they studied the papers that could save or doom them all. The mountain settled into peaceful rhythm as autumn deepened toward winter. Each day brought Clara and Jacob closer, their careful dance of propriety softening into natural affection. In the quiet moments between chores and lessons, love bloomed as gently as spring flowers. Clara sat by lamplight in the evenings, mending Jacob's work shirts with precise stitches. But where once she would have made simple repairs, Now her needle wove delicate patterns along the cuffs and collars, tiny pine trees and stars that transformed necessity into art. Jacob noticed these loving touches, running his rough fingers over the stitches with wonder in his eyes. In his workshop, Jacob's hands crafted increasingly intricate gifts for Clara. First came a wooden comb, its teeth perfectly spaced, the handle carved with intertwining roses. Clara's eyes moistened when he presented it, understanding the hours of patient work each petal represented. Next appeared a jewelry box, though Clara owned no jewelry, its lid adorned with carved mountain wildflowers so delicate they seemed ready to sway in a breeze. But Jacob's masterpiece was the set of classroom supplies he created for the children's lessons. He worked late into the night, planning and sanding until each piece was perfect. The miniature desk had a lifting lid for storing slate and pencils. Alphabet blocks bore precisely carved letters in both English and German. Number sticks were painted in cheerful colors, and the small blackboard frame held a smooth slate surface Clara could write on for hours. Their evening chores became a quiet communion. While washing dishes, they stood close enough for their shoulders to brush. As they brought in firewood together, their hands would meet on the logs. Each small touch carried meaning. Each shared glance held conversations their hearts weren't quite ready to speak aloud. One crisp evening, Jacob sat with Thomas on the workshop steps, teaching him to whittle. Clara watched from the doorway as Jacob guided the boy's hands, showing him how to carve with the grain of the wood. The simple scene, man and child bound by love rather than blood, touched something deep in her heart. Anna would have loved teaching him this, Jacob said softly, surprising Clara with the mention of his first wife. His eyes stayed on Thomas's careful movements as he continued. She always wanted many children, used to sing German lullabies while she cooked, practicing for the family she dreamed of having. Thomas concentrated on his whittling, but Clara could tell he was listening intently to these precious details about the aunt he'd never known. Sometimes I wonder why God let me live when he took her, Jacob admitted, his voice rough with old grief. She would have been such a wonderful mother. Clara sat beside him on the step, close enough to offer comfort, but not so near as to startle him from his memories. Perhaps he knew these children would need you someday, she said gently. Need both of us. Jacob looked at her then, really looked at her, and Clara felt safe enough to share her own fears. I always thought I'd die an old maid, too educated for any man to want, too plain to attract a husband. I was so afraid of living and dying unloved, without children to care for. Thomas suddenly stood and went inside, sensing the private nature of their conversation. In the growing dusk, Jacob and Clara rose and walked to the porch railing. Above them, the first stars pricked through the darkening sky like diamonds scattered on velvet. Jacob took Clara's hand, his palm warm against her fingers. You are neither plain nor unwanted, he said softly. You are exactly what this family needs, what I need. When he kissed her, it was gentle as a prayer. Clara felt years of loneliness melt away as Jacob's arms encircled her. This was not the desperate arrangement she'd proposed that first day. This was love, pure and healing, washing away old hurts like spring rain. A muffled giggle made them break apart. Through the window, they could see 3 small faces quickly ducking out of sight, whispering excited German phrases Clara was beginning to understand. Jacob reached into his pocket and withdrew a simple gold ring with a small pearl. This was Anna's, he said quietly. She told me, near the end, that she wanted it to bring love to our family again someday. Would you honor us by wearing it? Clara understood the profound trust in this offering. Not just the ring, but the memories it carried, the future it promised. Yes, she whispered, tears sparkling in her eyes as Jacob slipped the ring onto her finger. Yes, with all my heart. The morning sun painted golden stripes across the cabin floor as Clara stirred porridge at the stove. Her new ring caught the light, sending tiny sparkles dancing on the wall. The familiar weight of it on her finger felt right, as if it had been waiting all these years just for her. Emma burst into the kitchen, her face glowing with excitement. "I found Mama's old white dress in the trunk. It's perfect for the wedding." She spread the simple cotton dress across the table, its yellowed fabric still crisp and clean. "We can add fresh lace at the collar and maybe some blue ribbon for luck." Clara touched the dress reverently, understanding its significance. "It's beautiful, Emma. Are you certain you want me to wear it?" "Yeah, of course." Emma hugged Clara fiercely. "You're going to be our real mother now." In the workshop, Thomas stood beside Jacob's workbench, watching intently as his uncle demonstrated basic carving techniques. "I want to make something special for Clara," Thomas declared. "Something to show her she's part of our family." Jacob smiled, ruffling the boy's hair. "That's a fine idea, Thomas. What were you thinking of making?" "Maybe a picture frame? For when we take our family portrait at the wedding?" Little Maria skipped between cabin and workshop all morning, practicing her new word. "Mama!" she would call out whenever she spotted Clara, her face beaming with joy. "Mama, Mama, Mama!" Each time, Clara's heart melted a little more. She gathered the small girl into her arms, breathing in the sweet scent of her hair. "Yes, Liebling," she would answer, using the German endearment she'd learned. "I'm here." Jacob spent the morning sketching plans for the cabin expansion. "We'll add a proper bedroom here," he explained, pointing to his drawings, "and maybe extend the main room to make space for more students. Other families on the mountain would surely send their children to learn from you." Clara nodded, already imagining the possibilities. "We could offer both English and German lessons. The children could help each other learn." After lunch, Clara sat at the table to write her letter. "Dear Mr. Murphy," she began, "I hope this finds you well. Would you be so kind as to forward my remaining possessions to the Brennan homestead on Pine Ridge? I am to be married." The words flowed easily, filled with quiet joy. She had found not just security, but love. Not just shelter, but a home. Not just children to teach, but a family to cherish. That evening, they prepared a celebration dinner together. Emma taught Clara her mother's dumpling recipe while Thomas proudly set the table with Jacob's best woodwork. Maria decorated with pine branches she'd gathered, their fresh scent filling the cabin with mountain fragrance. Before eating, they joined hands for prayer. Jacob's deep voice led them in both German and English. "Dear Lord, we thank you for bringing us together, for making us a family." The next morning dawned cold and clear. Clara had just cleared away the breakfast dishes when hoofbeats approached the cabin. Through the window, she saw Sheriff Kohler riding up with Cyrus Blackwood and 2 armed deputies. Jacob stepped onto the porch to meet them, his stance protective. "What brings you gentlemen up the mountain?" Blackwood dismounted smoothly, his smile sharp as a knife. "Just a small matter of documentation, Mr. Brennan." He withdrew papers from his coat. "It seems your brother sold his mining rights to Consolidated Mining before his unfortunate accident." "That's a lie," Jacob said firmly. "Heinrich would never sell without telling me." Sheriff Kohler stepped forward, hand on his gun belt. "Now, Brennan, these documents are properly filed. Unless you can prove otherwise, you're guilty of fraud and theft of mining property." "Those papers are forged!" Jacob moved to examine them, but one deputy blocked his path while the other drew his weapon. The children watched in horror from the doorway as their uncle was grabbed roughly. Little Maria, not understanding the danger, broke free from Emma's grip. "Uncle Jacob!" she cried, running toward him. "Maria, no!" Clara lunged for the child, but she was too far away. The deputy holding Jacob shoved him back. Maria's small body collided with the man's leg, throwing her off balance. She fell backward, her head striking the bottom step with a sickening crack. The world seemed to stop. Maria lay terrifyingly still, a small trickle of blood staining her blonde hair. Emma screamed. Thomas ran to his sister. Clara reached her in 3 desperate strides, gathering the unconscious child into her arms. "She's breathing," Clara announced, her teacher's training helping her stay calm, despite her racing heart. "But she needs a doctor right away." Jacob strained against the deputy's grip, his face white with fear. "Let me go to her." Clara cradled Maria's limp form on the rough-hewn cabin floor, her hands trembling as she checked the child's vital signs. Blood seeped from an ugly gash on Maria's forehead, staining her blonde hair crimson. Though the little girl breathed steadily, she wouldn't open her eyes no matter how softly Clara called her name. "Please, she needs help!" Clara pressed her handkerchief against the wound, trying to stem the bleeding. "She's just a child." Jacob struggled violently against the deputies holding him, his face contorted with fear and fury. "Let me go to her. She needs a doctor, now!" The deputies tightened their grip, one pressing the barrel of his gun against Jacob's ribs. Blackwood surveyed the scene with cold calculation, brushing dust from his expensive coat sleeve. "How unfortunate, but accidents tend to happen to those who harbor stolen property." He pulled the forged documents from his jacket. "Sign over the claim, Brennan, or I'll have all 3 children sent to the Territorial Orphanage in Denver. I hear it's quite austere this time of year." Clara's examination revealed worrying signs. Maria's pupils were unevenly dilated, and her breathing had grown shallow and irregular. Years of teaching had taught her to recognize serious head injuries. "Her pupils aren't right," she announced, fighting to keep her voice steady. "If she doesn't see Dr. Morrison immediately, she couldn't finish the sentence. Sheriff Collar shifted uncomfortably, perhaps finding his conscience at last. He glanced at the unconscious child, then at Blackwood. "Maybe we should..." "Send your deputy for the doctor," Blackwood cut in sharply. "But Brennan comes with us. He's under arrest for fraud." "You can't take him," Emma cried out. "Please, we need Uncle Jacob." But the deputies were already dragging Jacob toward their horses. He twisted in their grip, calling back, "Clara, take care of them. I'll find a way." A deputy's fist cut off his words. Thomas ran to the window, his small fists clenched. "I'll shoot them," he shouted in German, but Clara called him back sharply. "No, Thomas. Stay inside. Help me with your sister." The boy reluctantly returned as hoofbeats faded down the mountain trail. One deputy remained behind, mounting up to fetch the doctor. "Schnell, Emma," Clara directed, forcing herself to focus. "Help me move her to the bed. Carefully now." Together they lifted Maria's small body, carrying her to the children's bedroom. The child moaned once but didn't wake. Through the long, terrible night, Clara never left Maria's side. She bathed the wound with clean water, applied cold compresses to reduce swelling, and prayed more fervently than she had in years. Emma helped prepare fresh bandages while Thomas maintained his vigil at the window, watching for either threat or help. Twice Maria partially woke, her eyes unfocused and confused. She mumbled in German, calling for her father, then slipped back into unconsciousness. Each time, Clara's heart clenched with fear. She sang soft hymns, stroked Maria's hair, and bargained with God to spare this precious child. "Please, Lord," she whispered, "I'll do anything. Just let her live." Emma curled up beside her sister's bed, refusing to sleep. "What if she never wakes up?" she asked in a small voice. "She will," Clara assured her, praying she spoke truth. "She's strong, like her mother." Though she'd never met Heinrich's wife, she felt certain any woman who'd raised such remarkable children must have been extraordinary. Thomas finally dozed off in the chair by the window, his young face troubled even in sleep. Clara covered him with a blanket, then resumed her watch. The eastern sky was just beginning to lighten when hoofbeats approached. Thomas jerked awake, grabbing his father's old rifle, but Clara recognized Dr. Morrison's buggy through the window. The doctor's examination was thorough but gentle. He cleaned and stitched the head wound, tested Maria's reflexes, and checked her pupils several times. Finally, he straightened up with a cautious smile. "She has a serious concussion," he announced, "but I believe she'll make a full recovery with proper rest and monitoring. Keep her quiet and still. Watch for any changes in breathing or pupils. I'll return tomorrow to check on her." Clara sagged with relief, gathering Emma into a fierce hug as tears spilled down both their faces. Thomas lowered the rifle at last, scrubbing at his eyes with his sleeve. Maria stirred slightly on the bed, her small hand reaching out. Clara caught it immediately, squeezing gently. "We're here, Liebling," she whispered. "We're all here." Clara sat beside Maria's bed, gently stroking the child's pale forehead around the bandaged wound. Though the little girl slept peacefully now, the terror of the night still gripped Clara's heart. Emma and Thomas huddled close, their eyes wide with fear. "What will happen to us?" Emma whispered, her voice trembling. "The orphanage in Denver. I've heard stories. Children disappear into the factories. They separate brothers and sisters. We'll never see each other again." Thomas wrapped his arms protectively around his sister. "I won't let them take us. I'll run away first." Clara pulled both children close, her mind racing. Heinrich's Bible sat on the bedside table, containing the original claim documents that could prove Blackwood's deception. But what good were papers when the sheriff himself was corrupt? Maria stirred slightly, murmuring in her sleep. Clara touched the child's cheek, feeling its warmth. In that moment, clarity struck her like lightning. These children needed more than comfort. They needed someone to fight for them. "Emma," Clara said firmly, "can you care for Maria while I go to town? Keep applying the cold compresses just as I showed you. Thomas will come with me." Emma straightened her shoulders, trying to look brave. "Yeah, I can do it. But why Thomas?" "Because," Clara said, retrieving Heinrich's Bible, "your brother needs to witness what happens next." She tucked the precious book securely inside her coat. The morning air bit cold as Clara and Thomas rode the wagon into Cedar Falls. The boy sat rigid beside her, his father's determination evident in his clenched jaw. Their first stop was the Catholic church, where Pastor O'Malley received them in his study. The elderly priest examined Heinrich's original documents carefully. "Yes," he confirmed, "I witnessed Heinrich file these myself. The signature and seal are genuine." He looked up at Clara with keen eyes. "But you'll need more than my word to stop Blackwood." "I know," Clara replied, squeezing Thomas's shoulder. "That's why we're going to the street." Main Street was busy with morning traffic when Clara pulled the wagon to a stop. She spotted several of Blackwood's men lounging outside the saloon, but she refused to let fear stop her now. Finding a sturdy wooden crate near Murphy's General Store, she dragged it into position. "Thomas," she said quietly, "whatever happens, stay close to the wagon." Clara climbed onto the crate, her heart pounding but her voice strong and clear. "Good people of Cedar Falls, I need you to hear the truth about Cyrus Blackwood and what he's doing to honest families." Heads turned. People paused. Clara drew Heinrich's Bible from her coat. "Yesterday, Cyrus Blackwood and Sheriff Kohler came to Jacob Brennan's homestead with forged documents, claiming Heinrich Brennan sold his silver claim before his death. When Jacob refused to accept this lie, they arrested him. And in their violence, they knocked down a 5-year-old girl who may have died if not for God's mercy." The crowd grew larger. Clara held up Heinrich's Bible. "Here are the original claim documents, witnessed by Pastor O'Malley himself. Compare them to Blackwood's forgeries. See how he threatens and bullies families into selling their land for pennies. How many of you have watched neighbors driven away? How many more children must be hurt before we stand together?" Murmurs rippled through the gathering townspeople. Clara saw recognition in their faces. Other families who had faced similar threats, who had watched helplessly as neighbors disappeared. "This isn't just about the Brennan children's inheritance," Clara continued, her voice carrying clearly down the street. "This is about justice, about faith, about protecting the innocent from those who would prey upon them. Heinrich Brennan died believing his children would be safe in this community. Are we going to prove him wrong? No, someone shouted. Others joined in. The Lord tells us to defend the fatherless, Clara pressed on, drawing strength from the crowd's response. To stand against wickedness. I am just a schoolteacher who came to this mountain seeking survival. But God has given me 3 precious children to protect, and I will not let Cyrus Blackwood steal their future. Thomas stood straighter beside the wagon, pride shining in his eyes as he watched Clara champion his family's cause. More townspeople gathered, including several who had lost claims to Blackwood's schemes. Their anger was palpable now, righteous and unified. Clara held the Bible high. I challenge anyone to examine these documents. See the truth of Blackwood's deception. Will you help us stop this corruption before another child is harmed, before another family is destroyed? The crowd's response was immediate and overwhelming. Shopkeepers, ranchers, miners, people who had watched silently for too long, stepped forward to offer support. Clara saw fear and greed giving way to something stronger. Community standing together against injustice. Clara's brave stand on Main Street sparked an immediate response. Townspeople began stepping forward, their voices trembling with long-suppressed anger as they shared their own encounters with Blackwood's intimidation. Mrs. Patterson, wringing her hands nervously, approached Clara. I must confess something, she said, her young face tight with shame. My husband was pressured to ensure you lost your teaching position. Blackwood's men threatened us after they learned you'd been talking to families about their mining rights. From the gathering crowd, Mr. Guthrie hurried forward clutching a leather portfolio. The elderly land office clerk spread out document after document showing a clear pattern of suspicious claim transfers. All these properties, he explained, pointing to the dates, sold for far below their value to Consolidated Mining. The telegraph office boy came running down the street, waving a yellow paper. Message from the territorial marshal, he shouted. The crowd fell silent as Clara read the telegram aloud. The marshal's office had been investigating Consolidated Mining enterprises for months, gathering evidence of fraud and extortion across the territory. By mid-afternoon, hoofbeats announced the arrival of Sheriff McKenna, the real county sheriff, with 4 deputies. They moved swiftly to arrest both Blackwood and the corrupt Sheriff Kohler. Jacob was released immediately, all charges dropped. When Jacob reached the cabin, he found Maria propped up on pillows, her eyes clear and alert. Water, please, Uncle Jacob, she asked weakly, bringing tears to everyone's eyes. The children surrounded him and Clara, holding tight as if afraid to let go. As evening settled over the mountain, Pastor O'Malley's wagon appeared. The elderly priest beamed as he shared his news. The bishop has granted permission for your wedding this Sunday, he announced, and the whole town wants to attend to show their support. That night, the family gathered around Maria's bed. Jacob held Heinrich's Bible as they read together, giving thanks for their deliverance and the promise of their future as a true family. Sunday morning painted the mountain in golden light. The autumn air carried the crisp scent of pine as wagons and riders wound their way up the trail to Jacob Brennan's homestead. The entire town of Cedar Falls had come to witness love triumph over darkness. Inside the cabin, Emma helped Clara with the final adjustments to Anna's wedding dress. The ivory silk, carefully altered to fit Clara's taller frame, caught the sunlight streaming through the window. Emma had worked delicate stitches along the hem and bodice, adding her own touch of love to the cherished garment. Jacob stood before his mirror, adjusting the vest Clara had embroidered with tiny forget-me-nots and pine branches. His hands trembled slightly as he smoothed his freshly trimmed beard. Through the window, he watched Thomas practicing his steps as ring-bearer, the simple gold bands tied carefully to a small pillow. Maria, her golden curls adorned with ribbons, skipped around the yard, gathering late mountain wildflowers and fragrant pine needles for her basket. The bump on her forehead had faded to a barely visible reminder of their trials. Pastor O'Malley arranged the gathered townspeople before the cabin's front porch, which Jacob had decorated with carved wooden garlands. When Clara emerged, a collective sigh rose from the crowd. She walked with quiet dignity, her eyes fixed on Jacob's loving gaze. Their vows rang clear in the mountain air. Clara spoke of honoring Anna's memory while nurturing new love. Jacob's voice broke with emotion as he pledged to cherish Clara's courage and gentle spirit. The children stood close, their family circle complete as Pastor O'Malley pronounced them husband and wife. The celebration lasted until sunset. Tables groaned with contributed dishes, fiddles sang out dance tunes, and laughter echoed across the mountainside. Children played while adults shared stories, their community bonds strengthened by shared triumph over injustice. 6 months later, spring found the mountain transformed. The Brennan homestead had grown, with a new schoolroom addition where Clara, her pregnancy now visible, taught a dozen local children. Jacob's workshop bustled with orders from new families settling nearby, drawn by honest mining opportunities. Emma had discovered her own gift for teaching, helping Clara with the younger students. Thomas spent his afternoons learning carpentry at his uncle's side, while Maria had become everyone's darling, spreading joy with her innocent wisdom. As evening settled over the mountain, the family gathered on their wide porch. Clara's voice rose and fell with the story she read, while Jacob's hands moved steadily over the cradle taking shape beneath his tools. Children's laughter floated up from the yard, mixing with bird song and the gentle whisper of pine boughs. Lamplight spilled from their windows, a beacon of warmth against the darkening sky, proof that love could transform the loneliest mountain into the richest home of all. Thanks for tuning in. These stories remind us that life is more than headlines. It's about heartlines. Subscribe if you want more moments that make you pause, feel, and reflect.